and together we run this Buddhism 101 group. So today we're going to have our usual Dharma service. I guess I got to put on my microphone. Today we're going to have our usual first Tuesday service. The typical first Tuesday service will be instructions, which is what I'm doing now, followed by meditation. For the meditation, we typically teach, if you have a meditation practice, by all means, as long as it's not disruptive for anyone else in the group, do your typical meditation practice. If you've never meditated before, if you want to try something new, the 3 techniques that we typically teach here are: 1, simply focus on the sensations of breathing, how it feels to breathe, and just be present with the breath. The second technique is to count your breaths. So count your breaths up to 10. When you get to 10, start over again with 1. Inevitably, you'll lose count, you'll lose concentration. That's part of the practice of meditation. And so you start up with 1 again and just keep counting to 10. And then repeat. The third technique is to synchronize a phrase or a word to your breath. The one that I typically recommend is one from Thich Nhat Hanh, in which he would recommend, as you're breathing in, you say, breathing in your mind, you say, breathing in, I calm my mind. Breathing out, I smile. And you try to have like a half smile on your face, a Mona Lisa smile or the Buddha smile. If you notice, he'll have a half smile on his face in many statues. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so we're going to be doing the meditation, and then after the meditation, we will be discussing our Dharma talk. The Dharma talk today is that we're going to discuss the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, called right speech. And so we'll talk a little bit about that first noble, that one element of the Noble Eightfold Path. I didn't want to say first because these are not intended to be steps, but typically there are a few that you do start with, and right speech is one of those earlier ones that most people will typically start with. After then the Dharma talk, I'll just open it up for questions and discussions. Typically the first few questions are about what the topic was for the day, but then nearing the end of the hour, it's a free-for-all. Any questions about Buddhism are open. Okay? Good. Let's do this. So I'm going to have Leon start us then with the meditations and with the bell. And you need the steering to the sun. I think so. All right. Good. So I'll leave that here with you. And then if you'll excuse me, Vinny? Yeah. Could we chat real quick outside? No. Meditation. All right. But we are going to need to have a discussion. All right, we'll give it a try then. Welcome, everyone. For those who are on the back, y'all have cushions to sit on, or y'all sitting on the floor?
We're on the floor.
Oh, there are a couple of cushions over here, so you can be comfortable, or you can use the chairs, whatever you want to do.
You can grab one of these.
Yeah, can you pass those back, or one of them back?
I was going to say, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. And we're trying to avoid to sit on the carpet in case you missed that part. All right. Right speech. Last time, or last month, I started introducing the idea of the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is the prescription for the suffering that we experience in this life, in this world. It's the medicine for what ails the world and what ails us. It's supposed to be the answer to the question, how can I reduce my suffering? How can I be happier in life? Okay. And there are 8 paths, and they're called Noble Eightfold Path. The noble doesn't mean somehow royalty. It means noble as in it's an elevated path. It's it's
Pure.
just pure. It's the best path. So that's kind of the idea of noble, not noble in terms of princely or kingly. And typically, you will see the Eightfold Path divided into 3 subsections. One of the sections that is usually spoken of first is the path of morality. The idea being that if you're able to live and cultivate a moral life, then the next few steps, wisdom and concentration, become a lot easier. Okay? And so we want to cultivate this moral attitude. And the idea is that if you are living a moral life, then you have less to worry about. And the example I gave last time was lying. When we lie, we have to make all this effort to try and remember the lie that we told, and it's just more work. It's a lie that can compound upon itself and just causes more suffering than if you had not lied. So this idea that if we live a moral life, we're able to reduce the amount of suffering in our lives and prepare ourselves for a better life. So the first one I'm going to talk about today is right speech. And right speech is the idea of it's a respect for truth and the well-being of others. So a respect for truth and a well-being for others. So keep that in mind as I talk. Now, one of the first few things that came to mind as I was preparing this talk was this old story I heard from a priest. The priest was giving his homily to a whole bunch of school kids. I was one of those in the crowd. And the story stuck with me. He said that there was once a teacher who asked his students to bring him pictures of the most deadliest weapon they could find. So a picture of the deadliest weapon. And so one student came the next day and brought a picture of the nuclear weapon. This is deadly because it can kill so many. Then the other student, the second student, brought a picture of a virus. And this can kill thousands. But then the third student came and he brought a picture of a human tongue. The idea being that human speech can be one of the most destructive forces. And that's kind of the underlying idea of this right speech. We are often unmindful of how much harm our speech can cause. And right now you might be thinking about the harm that you or others have caused to other people with their speech. But I also want to emphasize, I want to put the spotlight of mindfulness on the right or the wrong speech that goes on in your own head towards yourself. Right speech is not only about the speech you give to others. Right speech is also about the speech you give yourself. And so as you listen to this talk, be mindful of how it affects others, how it affects you. So right speech, as the Buddha talked about right speech, he's had a lot to say about it, a lot more than I can fit in the few minutes that I have here. But he did emphasize 4 elements that were wrong speech. Right? Lying, slander, harsh words, and gossip, or what was often called idle talk. Okay? Lying. So lying, lying is considered one of the more dangerous acts because it undoes a lot of things. Lying is often considered also dangerous because once you become comfortable with lying, then it's a slippery slope to being comfortable with other immoral acts. So if you can lie, and you can lie easily, then it becomes easier to do other acts that are not very noble. And so working on trying to be honest in your speech becomes very important. It becomes a practice. And that word practice is said a lot because the Buddha isn't saying, you have to use the right speech now or else. You're never going to get to nirvana. You never hear him say that. But you do hear the Buddha talking about practice, how you work on this little by little. We lie not only to others, but sometimes we also lie to ourselves. And lying to yourselves undoes a lot of good. Lying to yourself can be dangerous. I'm okay. I'm not sick. I don't need to go to the doctors. Right? I don't need to see a psychologist or a therapist. Right? Or I'm okay. No, nothing's wrong with me. So we tell lies to ourselves, we tell lies to others. Slander. Slander is the idea, it's very similar to lies, but it's when we're telling lies about others. When we are trying to bring others down a notch, because we see them as sort of, in our own eyes, see them as somehow being unworthy, or too arrogant, or too above their status, or we somehow feel threatened by them. And so slander offers us a false sense of feeling superior to the other. Slander internally often comes in it sounds like our own voice, but oftentimes it's a recording from childhood. Messages we received in childhood that have stuck with us and therefore bring us down. It's a form of slander, but towards our own self. I'm not good enough. I have to be perfect in order to be lovable. I'm not worthy. I'm not pretty. I'm not smart. I never get anything right. I always break things. I'm such a klutz. These are all forms of name-calling that we've internalized. They're recordings from our past that we've made into our own voice. And so if you're going to work on this path of right speech, it's about challenging and undoing some of those voices, being mindful of that voice in your head and being able to challenge it, being mindful of its effect on you, on your happiness and suffering, and challenging it. Yeah, I mess up sometimes, but I also do good. Being perfect is impossible. Oftentimes when I work with someone who is dealing with perfectionism and that voice in their head, I say, do me a favor, give me an example of someone perfect. I would so like to meet this person because I have tons of questions for them. And they never can. They can mention people who are perfectly imperfect for them, you know, loved ones or stuff like that. But a perfect person, never. And so why do you hold yourself up to such an unrealistic standard? If you could only be loved if you're perfect, then you're setting yourself up to never be lovable. So the speech, the slander that we internalize and say to ourselves is something we work on, or should work on. Harsh words. Harsh words is more than just curse words. What makes a harsh word is words that are meant to injure, words that are meant to destroy. Right? To me, this brings home the fact that it's the intent is very important in our actions in Buddhism. So, it reminds me of a story. I don't know if I should share it. I'm going to share it. I remember once spending a lot of time with this one holy person. This holy person was cursing up a storm. And I was like, oh my, you know, I was shocked. I'm like, why are you talking now? Aren't you still not supposed to use curse words? And he said something to me, I don't remember the exact words, but it was kind of a pattern I hadn't noticed. He used curse words for sort of the literary effect or for the emphasis of emotions, but he never cursed at someone. He never cursed to degrade someone or himself. And so the intent behind the words, so that's why, and he was able to get away with sounding funny because he wasn't malicious about it, wasn't hurtful about it. And he recognized there were some people who you don't speak that way in front of because it is something that is hard for them to hear. And so he knew when to do it, when not to do it. So something about me, gave him permission to be that way. I don't know what it was. But the idea there is the harsh words it's not as easy as saying, oh, I'm not going to curse. It's deeper than that. I'm not going to use words that will just be destructive or hurtful. I'll avoid labels. The Southern politeness. Oh, bless his heart. Right? So even though those are kind words, the intent behind those words can be, in certain cases, very harsh. So it's not the word itself, it's the intent of those words. All right. And towards yourself as well. Oh, how many people I've just been hurt when I hear people say, I'm so stupid. I'm fat and ugly. Those aren't curse words, and yet they are so harsh and so harmful. They're words that we typically wouldn't use for another person, but somehow we're okay with using it for ourselves. Those are harsh words. Those are the words we try to avoid. We try to get out of the practice or the habit of using. Finally, idle talk or gossip. The idea of sort of trying to weave stories behind other people's backs or create stories to help bring other people down a notch. Right? Or to create discord, disharmony in a group. Passing on information that you maybe have heard secondhand or even third hand and not knowing for sure if it's true. That's a form of gossip. It may not be that you're actually trying to say something bad, but you're passing on hearsay or hearsay of hearsay. And so as much as possible, you try to speak with words that you can verify, words that are honest, words that are based on your own experience. Now, idle talk is often equated with gossip. But when you turn that inwards, idle talk is the noise in our head. It's the lack of peace in our mind. Always seeking entertainment or wondering silly things or wondering hurtful things, stressing, being anxious. And it's just like a noise, a background noise. It's just a chatter going on in our heads and does not stop. The intent then of the practice of Buddhism, of meditation, is to help quiet down that chatter in the head, that idle talk that happens inside our minds. So, what should I do instead? What are good examples? We talked about all these bad examples. I often tell when I work with parents, and I say, you know, we're really good about teaching our kids what not to do, but they're little kids. They haven't even learned what they're supposed to do. And so I try to teach the parents, in addition to telling them what not to do, give them alternatives. Tell them what to do. And that's important for us as adults as well. It's easy for us to sort of think, oh, I did that again. Oh, I shouldn't have done that, whatever. And so if we focus just on the negative, it becomes easier to slip into that self-flagellation again. So let's talk about some of the positives. What are some of the positive uses of speech? One is teaching, passing on knowledge, sharing knowledge, humbly, recognizing that knowledge is something that evolves. Knowledge is something that changes. There was a time when it was okay to teach that the earth is the center of the universe, right? And then we learned about solar systems and math, and we learned that the earth was part of a larger system. And then we learned even more and learned about infinity, and according to infinity, yeah, we're the center of the universe again, because it's infinite that way, whenever you go. But the knowledge evolved. And so as opposed to us being the center of everything, now it's sort of more of a mathematical thing, but it's still part of a larger system. Simple example, but the idea is be humble in your sharing of knowledge. Recognize that the knowledge you share will continue to evolve. And so try not to speak from the perspective of saying, this is the truth. This is how it's supposed to be. Instead, it's a humble approach of, this is my understanding. This is what I know right now. All right? And so that's the perspective then, that humble teaching. Speech should be unified. So try to find ways to bring people together. Right? To find ways to overcome differences. I was very guilty of the opposite of this. Around the time of COVID. Because I just could not understand why some people would do certain things. And instead of unifying, I realized that I am worried to see my flashbacks on Facebook because there were words that were not very unifying. And so it's going to come haunt me later on, my mistakes. But they're lessons. I realized, hey, that was not very helpful. It was not very unifying. And so we work at it. If we try to use our speech to unify, to bring together. Speech should also try to be encouraging. Right? Try to encourage each other. Try to encourage yourself. Right? Be your own best cheerleader. Hey, yeah, you messed up, but come on, you got this, you can do this. It's okay to mess up, you're human, you're allowed to. Now let's learn from it and let's keep moving forward. Be encouraging to yourself and to others. Right? I also want to, and this example I'm about to give really brings this home. Speech is not just about verbal, auditory speech. It's just communication. Smiling more. smiling at strangers. All of that is a form of right speech because you are communicating a positivity. So it's not just speech, it's right communication. And finally, helping. Using speech to help, to heal, to encourage. Oh, I already said encourage, but to help and to heal. All right. Sometimes it is being brutally honest. And sometimes it is waiting till the person is ready to hear the brutal honesty. And sometimes being honest at the wrong time, we know it doesn't help sometimes. And that takes wisdom, and that's another part of the Eightfold Path. But the goal here then is to try to use speech in a way that is helping, helpful, healing towards others, and again, towards yourself. If the simplest challenge, if you say, man, that was so stupid. I say, wait a second, is that helpful? Is that encouraging? Is that teaching? Is that unifying? No. So that's speech that I got to work to not do in my own head anymore. Imagine how the world would be if we just learned to master this one path of the 8. Imagine how much less suffering there would have been over the last few years, the last few decades or centuries, if we had mastered right speech. If you find yourself helpless, feeling like there's nothing you can do, starting with your own right speech begins that path of healing. Not only for yourself, but for your community, and eventually, hopefully, larger than just our community. So be that example of right speech. Good. Thank you. Now I'll just sort of open it up for any questions, comments, discussions, thoughts. As our master Pantriya, the young monk says, you already know what I'm about to say, emotional outbursts. Let's see. I'll open it up. Sure.
How important is right understanding and right speech and right intention with right speech? Because they kind of, from what I'm understanding, kind of go hand in hand. Yeah. Can't really have one without the other, because you got to know sometimes speaking the truth can also challenge and destroy people. And the truth, you also have to understand, is dualistic. There's many points of views of the truth. So when you're speaking the truth, it might be the true truth to you, but it's not necessarily true truth to the person you're dealing with. So how long do you spend with an individual to actually know the proper way to use right speech and right intention and right understanding?
So I'm going to answer that indirectly. We have to move away from this idea of a clear delineation, a clear distinction. Right speech cannot stand on its own without the other 7 paths. As you mentioned very early in your conversation, the need for right understanding and right intention. And so one of the drawbacks of the way I'm presenting it is that I'm presenting it as individual pieces, but they're not individual pieces. They are things that interplay, interconnect, are interwoven, and so Buddha gave it 8, but maybe it's 10, maybe it's 1,000. It's just 8. There's nothing magical about the 8. It's just, this is one way of trying to conceptualize an underlying truth. The second part of your question, there is no definitive delineating line that says when is, when do you know another person well enough to tell them the truth or to talk to them? Because the person that's in front of you isn't the same person that was in front of you 10 seconds ago. We evolve, we change. And that's why maybe the truth is not ready for you now, but the truth might be ready a minute from now or 5 minutes from now. And so there's no delineation, no like, oh good, 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, I'm ready.
Right.
And, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. It's not that easy. That's kind of what makes things a little messy. Right. So as you hear me talk, never or try to avoid thinking as this is separate from everything else. It's all interconnected. Okay?
I appreciate that comment and question. I can't remember your name.
Joe.
Because when you were talking, I was thinking that telling the truth and purposely trying to hurt somebody's feelings can co-occur.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm seconding his thoughts and questions.
Yeah.
One thing that stuck out in your talk to me was when you talked about speech, and then you used the word communication, which is important because speech, I think of speech as something emanating from me to you, but communication is more than me sending out a message. It's you getting the message and thinking about it, sending something back to me, right? So that made me think about the importance of listening. You talk about speaking, but I think listening
What a good
is
point.
another really good point. They're just right there together. Because if we keep talking, we're not giving the other person a chance to speak. And for myself, I find myself sometimes I'm getting a response ready in my mind while they're still talking. I'm like taking what they're saying, and I'm like, I'm going to say something really smart back to them. And meanwhile, I'm not even in the conversation anymore. So, and then another thing that one of the sutras that we read on Sunday is about how said, I'm going to listen for what's being said, and also listen for what's not being said. Because sometimes, to Alex's point, we communicate a lot between the words. It's not just the blah, blah, blah of our tongue flapping, but it's all that mental energy behind it and our intention too. So, but thank you for that. Help me realize kind of how.
This is why I have Leon next to me. He has
I'll tee it up for you.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yes, listening is so important. I love that.
So the perception of what's being left unsaid, because it has to do with how focused you are about right intention. But when you say what's being left unsaid, when you're dealing with another individual, is your attention so sharp enough to understand what might be left unsaid to apply the right kind of use of proper speech? So that's really that's the question. How other ways can you find what's being left unsaid? You know what I mean? There's some things that are just for some people that want to help people. There's roll the dice and guessing game kind of.
If you're paying attention, maybe you can sense it or feel it. The person's delivered something to you, and you go.
Right, but those can also be speculations. We can't just go off of
because I don't know what's in your mind. You're right.
Because it's like reflecting a pond. Like Life of Pi. There's this thing in Life of Pi, the movie Life of Pi. That's not the tiger. You're putting the emotions in the tiger. It's its own emotions reflecting back at you.
That's right.
And in a lot of ways, we do that with people, and we think we know what they're going through, their pain and their suffering. But if we're not careful enough, if we're mindful enough, we can hurt, we can damage, we can disrupt. Right. So sometimes the best thing to do is quietness, silence.
Yeah.
Yes. Not speaking is sometimes the best right speech.
A lot of times what we need is that right understanding and right wisdom, which are, you kind of going to that first question you mentioned,
right.
Being able to draw from these other paths.
Right.
And so it takes effort, it takes time, it takes making mistakes, it takes learning, it takes a whole bunch of things. For example, for me, as a psychologist, one of the things that I find helps me understand my patients is that I have studied the theories of the human mind. So that's where my PhD, you could say my PhD is on studying the different theories on the human mind. None of the theories are perfect, but each theory gives me a different perspective from a different point of view. And when I tried and put all those different perspectives together, it helps me understand what's being left unsaid. And I come off as some wise psychic psychologist, when in reality it's not psychic powers, it's not wisdom, it's the combination of knowledge with experience, which is wisdom. So knowledge plus experience, that's where the wisdom comes out. It's the fuel for wisdom.
They were able to communicate to you without necessarily using words. It was a contextual thing.
Mm-hmm. And then I take what I know from my past knowledge, apply it to the present moment, and I'm able to give a guess. Ask me if I know 100% for sure, if that's the answer, I'll tell you no. I have no idea for sure, I just have my best guess. And so then...
wisdom without experience? Somebody asked me, and so I really didn't know.
Can I have wisdom without experience? No, I don't think so. That's my biased answer. I often use the term Barnes and Noble Buddhists. These are the Buddhists who say they're Buddhists because they've read the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, and a whole bunch of other books. That's just knowledge. If you don't put it into practice and gain experience with that practice, you cannot attain wisdom. You have to struggle with trying to apply what you've learned. You have to fail. You have to make your mistakes. You have to put your foot in your mouth. And those mistakes, learn from them, and then continue this evolution. And then repeat. Go back to the same books you read before. So I love repetition because I'm not the same person I was when I first heard those words. I have a different experience. So now, when I get back to the same words or same repetition, I have a different perspective. I learned something deeper. So, short answer, I don't think so. You need both knowledge and experience, and that's the fuel for fire.
There's a good metaphor, which is learning a musical instrument. Think about learning to play the piano or guitar. You can study all the theory and know all the notes on the scales, but unless you sit down and actually press the keys and hear the note and go, oh, I need to do this. No, that's in the book. It's just saying, it's kind of like the Noble Eightfold Path. It's like, here's your instructions. Okay, now go have a life.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a funny story. Brilliant guy. I don't remember his name. But he taught himself how to swim by reading a book. And he read the book and read the book and read the book. And when he tried to swim the first time, he only kind of got it.
Yeah.
Right? And so he needed the experience with the water to finally actually get that final step to learn how to swim. So knowledge takes you only so far. You need the experience to get that last little bit of things that you can't get from a book. Can't get from my words. That's the other thing. I'm not enlightened. You don't see a halo around me. Right? I'm not in nirvana right now. And so even my words are incomplete. Right? Or maybe wrong. And so that's why it's important for you then to apply what you think you're learning, what you think you understand, and figure it out for yourself. I can't transfer my experience to you. You have to gain it for yourself. And anyone who says they have the answer is lying to you.
Speaking from my own experience with knowledge can help you be too much, sometimes too safe. You can have knowledge of a lot of things. You can have knowledge just by simply watching a person through their trials and tribulations. But sometimes you can just be too safe with the knowledge that you gain, and you're not lacking experience with it. Because the experience is that's going to heighten the emotion, and it's going to bring about the change. It's going to bring about the wanting to change, or the urge to change, or the ability to try to decide what to say the same. So often for
Do I
me.
read about swimming or do I actually do it?
Right. Exactly. And sometimes when we're too knowledgeable, we can be lacking the want to explore or experience.
Yeah.
And I think that's an issue.
I think I hear what you're saying. It's like when we're too self-satisfied, if we have an ego that says, I know all I need to know.
Yes.
Right.
And once you say that, then you're not open to anything new, right?
Yes, exactly.
You're dead at that point.
My
Right.
dad is like that. He thinks he's like the smartest man on earth.
And in certain areas, we're all like that.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
We're in certain, it may not be in all the areas, but there may be certain areas where we feel like I know more than everyone else. And we derive ego and oh, look at me. And then we find someone who knows a little more and like, oh, we feel threatened.
Right.
We feel bad about ourselves. We feel like we need to attack, gossip, to engage in wrong speech.
So, sorry, I don't mean to keep taking the floor.
Let me pause you because there was Vinay wanted to share something.
I want to add on wisdom. Buddhism teaches one of the thing is no self, and I think we talked about that last year. No self is very good. That eliminates kind of get rid of ego, and when we say I, like everything, we don't exist as a separate entity or individual entity. It's all interconnected. And if we think about that, the right speech and all those eightfold paths, they automatically come in play. We don't have to think. But as soon as we start thinking there's I, and I'm doing like I'm this, or I was getting a lot. I'm a psychologist, or I'm this. When we hear these things, then there's no wisdom. Absolutely zero wisdom when we speak as I. That's all I'm going to say. So wisdom comes only when we completely think there's no I, there's no ego.
Thank you, Vinny. We got about 7-ish more minutes. Feel free to sort of free for all any Buddhist questions or any questions about today. Feel free to throw them out there.
So this is a question that's kind of been on my mind the last couple of weeks, and I think it kind of ties in with right speech. So when we're talking to someone, like a family member or coworker or something that like we can't just cut them out of our life, and they're not practicing right speech, like maybe they're just very negative, and when we talk to them, it kind of just makes us feel like it's just dragging us down, How do you deal with that? Like, how do you detach from that and not carry around that weight when someone's just ranting and being so negative all the time?
Yeah. No easy answer. It's something you work at. It's ego, and so you're working on ego. If you do ego work, it is, I think the first thing that comes to my mind when I'm in a place like that is, I can't change that person. I can't force that person to change, but I have a lot of control over how I receive that information. And so if I can't do anything right now about the person who is toxic, what can I do in my own mind to protect myself, to not be offended, to not be bothered? How can I grow past this? And that's in a nutshell. How we do that, you're looking at hours and hours and hours of study.
I think the fact that you recognize what was happening that's huge. I mean, now you got something there. This is happening. Why is this happening? And how can I change that?
What can I do about my own thoughts?
'Cause,
Sometimes it does require creating some distance, just so that you can get your own stuff together, and then trying it. Ooh, I'm not quite there yet. So you create distance again, work on your own stuff again some more, come back. Ooh, not yet, And it's a give and take. It kind of, in a very indirect way, goes back to the question of there is no clear line of when I'm done. We like to think in terms of yes, no, black, white. We want simple answers. But as you delve deeper and deeper into Buddhism, it is messy. There are no simple answers because we are designed to complicate things. And so part of removing ego, as Vinny had brought up, is learning how to not complicate things. But that takes practice. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Something that we discussed, not recently, it was a while ago, but like we talked about when we were, like an attempt to be mindful, you label something. And it puts some tiny little space between you and whatever that negative emotion
That's
is.
a good one.
Right? Like, I like to think of literally as like a sticky note, like, negative. There they are being negative again.
There you go.
There I am feeling negative about them being negative again.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
even that tiny little sticky note, you know, mentally,
That's relief. That's relief from some suffering, isn't it?
just a little bit.
And then you work on it, and that space gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
And then after a while, they can go on all they want, and it just won't bother you a bit.
Yeah.
I have a,
Another
After you work on it,
a whole lot. And actually going off that whole lot, be patient and compassionate with yourself. You know, there's some of these people we've been dealing with all our lives, and so it's not like something you're going to solve overnight.
Mhm.
It's something that you solve little by little. If you start with Mary, the sticky notes, that's a wonderful place to start. That's creating, you're able to now distinguish, this is your toxicity, this is my immaturity. I can't fix the toxicity, but I can work on my own spiritual or emotional immaturity so that I can grow beyond this. One of the reasons kind of you want to create some distance with the toxicity is it's sort of like a plant. You know, a plant that doesn't have good soil is going to have a harder time growing. So if you're constantly exposed to this toxicity, it will be harder to grow spiritually or emotionally. So creating the sticky note distance or creating just physical distance gives you some time for a better environment to do that growth. And when you have to go back to the toxicity, you know, we'll learn some more, go back, grow some more, learn some more, grow. And this is back and forth. But be compassionate with yourself. Don't internalize that toxicity. That's the
hard
bad
part.
speech.
Yeah.
That's the negative self-speech towards ourselves.
That's right. Just say, you're trying to give me something, and I don't want it.
Okay.
I don't deserve it. I'm just not going to take it. So there's even a story about the Buddha, and this crazy man went up and he was yelling at the Buddha and trying to give him a hard time, and the Buddha was just really calm. And so finally the guy says, well, I don't understand why you're not getting angry. And he says, well, if you come up to me and you offer me a gift and I don't accept the gift, who does it belong to? He goes, well, it would still belong to me. He goes, the anger is still yours. Man, that's the ideal, but boy, if we can just get part of the way there, we can ease it, right?
Exactly.
how much do pre-indoctrinated traits affect mental formations? I mean, I think they affect them pretty harshly in a lot of ways. Like in the terms of nature and nurture, how much does nature and nurture apply to the inability to self-reflect? Because self-reflect is a taught skill. It's not really.
So Buddhism doesn't use nature and nurture, but it does talk a lot about sort of karma. And so from the Buddhist perspective, yeah, there are things that we inherit, things that are part of a long line of karmic action.
Karmic imprints.
Karmic imprints. It's just things that I can't talk about in the minute that we have.
I know, I'm always, you know me, you guys know me, I'm always asking.
Yeah.
I'm always asking.
I mean, karma, almost all this year is going to be dedicated to the Eightfold Path because we're doing one path every month. And so it won't be until about September-ish that we won't finish with this. But karma is one of those topics that I do want to cover because we hear the word and there's so much misunderstanding about the word karma. So be patient with me and I'll get to that in about 10 to 12 months. Right?
Put a sticky note on it.
Put a sticky note.
All I know nowadays.
So we are at the last minute here. I do want to thank you all very much for being here. Please remember that we're talking about the ideal. Ideally, we would be able to recognize our wrong speech. Ideally, we'd be able to create distance, toxicity. Ideally, fill in the blank. These are the goals. How we get there takes time and is unique to each of us. So be compassionate with yourself. Be patient with yourself. As long as you're working little by little towards that goal, you're doing the Buddhist thing. Okay? The pressure to achieve, the pressure to be perfect, not Buddhist. If it helps you, you can, this kind of funny story then. I was getting into an argument with my wife, and then she learned the trick. Whenever I start getting a little bit too out of hand, she says, "Are you being a good Buddhist right now?" No.
The truth hurts, doesn't it?
So ask yourself that question. When you start talking negative to yourself, am I being a good Buddhist? Right? So maybe that can be your sticky note. Maybe that can be the way of being mindful. Am I being a good Buddhist right now? By, beating myself up or hurting someone else. Am I being a good Buddhist right now? Hopefully someone in your life will love you enough to ask you if you're being a good Buddhist. I got lucky. Ooh, it's recorded. I can show my wife. Great. So remember that. This Sunday, every Sunday, 12:30, we have the regular service where we usually have a teaching at the very beginning by one of the monks from the temple, one or two monks, and then we have chanting afterwards. So everyone is invited to please come and be a part of that. In 2 weeks, I believe.
No, this Saturday.
Oh, this Saturday, the next meditation. So Master Thich Quang Tri, the young monk at the temple, this Saturday has a Meditation 101 group. And so if you want to focus primarily on learning more about meditation itself and all the different forms of meditation, wonderful class to attend. And so that's Saturday at 10, I believe, right?
Yes.
So Saturday at 10 this Saturday. It happens every other week.
So the meditation is the second and fourth Saturdays. This class is the first and third Tuesdays. But sometimes it lines up where we have two in the same. Like this week, we've got the 101 and then Saturday.
Yeah. For those of you who are new, I invite you to come back again. So we meet on the first and the third Tuesday of every month. The third Tuesday of every month is dedicated to a story or a parable. And so we just have a discussion on that. And then the first Tuesday is some new teaching. And that's why we're going to take up till like September, October, talking about the Eightfold Path. One of the reasons I wanted to set it up that way is I don't want to make more Barnes & Noble's Buddhists. This is not just about getting an A in Buddhism 101. It's about taking what you learn here today and applying it so that you can attain that wisdom. It's not about flooding you with everything. It's about take it little by little, apply it, learn from it. And then bring the next few set of questions that pop up. Great. Any other announcements?
I don't believe so, yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So if you will please join me, I'm going to ring the bell and share the merits. May any merit we have accrued by sharing the Dharma here today together bring us and others happiness, health, safety, and peace. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of the night and have a great week. I'll see you all in 2 weeks.
If y'all could help me, just bring your cushion. We're going to pile them up in this room right here.
There's a restroom in one of, it's like, it's outside that building over there, you'll see the restroom sign.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
What's falling?
The tower of
Cushion tower. Yeah, well, didn't have time to arrange them very good.
It's okay.
I'm gonna check, see if I got the lights to come on. I think they did. Yeah. Finish.